My name is David Wilson, and for the first 35 years of my life, I was an ordinary man. I had an ordinary job, a loving wife, two kids, and a home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. My life was filled with routine, the kind of routine you could set your watch to. I woke up each morning to the hum of my alarm clock, greeted my wife, Sarah, with a cup of coffee, and sent my kids off to school before heading to work. My work as a financial advisor was stable, nothing glamorous, but enough to keep the bills paid and my family comfortable. Like most men, I spent my days in the quiet tension between responsibility and the desire for a little more comfort, a little more success, a little more peace of mind. I worked hard to make sure we could live in a nice house, send the kids to decent schools, and save for the future. But the truth was, I was always a little stressed. There was never enough time to do everything I wanted. Between managing client portfolios, taking care of the house, and trying to keep up with the demands of my family, I often felt like I was running on a treadmill that only sped up the longer I stayed on it. Sarah and I had a good marriage, but like many couples, we were often caught up in the details of life. She would remind me to slow down, to spend more time with the kids, and to not get so wrapped up in work. But even then, I found myself distracted. Our conversations became increasingly about paying bills, scheduling doctor's appointments, and trying to figure out how to fit in a vacation that we both knew we couldn't afford. We loved each other, but we were stuck in the daily grind, trying to make the most of what we had, even if it sometimes felt like the world was spinning faster than we could keep up with. When I thought about the future, I always saw it as a blur of years ahead, filled with more work, more bills, and more time spent on things that didn't really matter. I had faith, yes, but it was the kind of faith that you carry in the back of your mind, like an old coat you don't wear much anymore. I prayed before meals and we went to church on Sundays, but it wasn't a driving force in my life. It was more of a tradition, something I did because it was what I had always done. I remember one night, sitting on the couch after dinner, flipping through the TV channels, Sarah next to me. The kids were upstairs playing video games or watching something on their tablets. I looked around our living room. Everything was exactly as it should be. The house was warm, the fireplace crackled softly, and there was peace. In those moments, I tried to enjoy the quiet. There was something beautiful in the routine, in the small moments of normalcy. But something was missing. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I knew I felt a pull, a longing for something more. There was a gnawing feeling that I was spending too much time focusing on the wrong things. I was so absorbed in my work, in keeping the financial boat afloat, that I hadn't really stopped to think about the bigger picture. The things that truly mattered, the things I had been neglecting. My relationship with Sarah, the time I could have spent playing with my kids, and yes, my faith. My spiritual life had become a distant thought, a faint whisper in the back of my mind, drowned out by the noise of everyday life. I didn't even realize it at the time, but I had been living with a kind of spiritual emptiness, one that I thought I could fill with more success, more money, more comfort. But life, as it always does, has a way of shaking you awake when you least expect it. And that's exactly what happened. It all began with a call from work, a simple phone call that turned my entire world upside down. There was a financial crisis. The market had crashed. My clients, many of whom I had spent years cultivating relationships with, were in full panic mode. And as much as I tried to calm them down, as much as I tried to assure them that things would eventually get better, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a market dip. This was something bigger, something darker. The numbers on the screen, the charts, they didn't add up. It felt like the foundation beneath me was starting to crack. I was in the middle of this crisis, trying to get everything under control when the storm came. I remember the exact moment. I was driving home after a long day of tense phone calls and difficult conversations, my mind racing with numbers, strategies, and the weight of my responsibilities. And that's when it happened. The tire blew and I lost control of the car. In what felt like a split second, the world around me exploded into chaos. There was a screech of metal, the sound of glass shattering, and then nothing. It was like someone had flipped a switch. Everything I had known, everything I had worked for, was suddenly irrelevant. The stress of the day, the financial crisis, the worry over my family, the constant need for more, all of it disappeared. There was no more noise, no more distractions. I couldn't feel my body, couldn't feel the pain, couldn't feel anything. It was as if I was floating, weightless. In that instant, the world I had been living in, the world of bills, work, and endless struggles, was gone. It was also trivial, so small compared to what I was about to experience. I didn't know it yet, but that moment would be the beginning of something far greater than I could ever have imagined. I don't know how long I was out. Time seemed to lose all meaning as I drifted away from the world of chaos and noise. It felt like waking from a strange dream where everything that mattered, everything I had focused on, was no longer relevant. As the car flipped and the sounds of destruction echoed around me, I lost all awareness of the physical world. My thoughts, which had been racing with worry, fear, and panic, suddenly went quiet. There was no pain, no fear, no more screaming, only a deep, profound stillness. When I first became aware of what was happening, I realized I wasn't in my body anymore. I wasn't even in the wreckage of the car. I was somewhere else. It wasn't like being awake, but it wasn't like being asleep either. It felt more like I had transcended the boundaries of physical reality. My awareness wasn't tied to anything, not to the car, not to the sounds around me, not even to my body. It was as if I had become pure consciousness, floating freely in a vast, limitless space. There was no fear, no sensation of falling, no sense of danger, just silence. I looked around, but all I could see was an endless void, dark, but not frightening. I wasn't alone, though. There was something, someone in the distance, a faint shimmer, a soft glow that seemed to draw me in, like a star on a distant horizon. I felt compelled to move toward it, though I didn't know how or why. I didn't walk, not physically at least. I didn't have legs to carry me, but I was still moving toward that light, pulled by an unseen force. As I approached the light, it began to take shape. The light became a presence. At first, I couldn't fully make out what it was, but I knew instinctively that this was something, someone, significant. And then I saw him. His figure materialized in the glow. He was tall, standing in front of me with a calmness and gentleness that instantly filled me with peace. His presence was overwhelming, but not in a way that made me feel small or insignificant. Instead, it made me feel understood, as though I had always been seen, always been loved, even when I didn't realize it. He didn't say anything at first. There was no need for words. I could feel his presence speaking directly to my soul, touching parts of me that had long been neglected. For a moment, I didn't even have to ask. I simply knew. He wasn't just a figure of light. He was the answer to every question I had ever had, the peace I had always searched for, the clarity I had always longed for. It was a feeling more than an understanding, but it was enough. I felt seen. I felt heard. I felt loved. And then he spoke. His voice didn't come through my ears, but through my heart, like a message being whispered deep into the very core of who I was. "David," he said. And when he spoke my name, it felt like a chord had been struck deep within me. It wasn't just a name. It was a calling. His voice wasn't the booming, thunderous sound you might expect, but rather it was warm, gentle, like the embrace of a father who had been waiting for you all your life. "I have been waiting for you," he said, and the simple truth of those words hit me like a wave. The weight of them settled in, but not with heaviness. It was a comfort, a relief. I wasn't alone, and I never had been. I wanted to speak, but the words stuck in my throat. The truth of the moment was too overwhelming to put into words. I was in the presence of something more real than anything I had ever known. More real than my life, my work, my family. This moment, was everything, and it was not like any of the fleeting concerns I had carried before. As I stood there in awe, he stepped closer. I could feel the love radiating from him. It was a love that transcended human understanding, beyond anything I had ever felt in my life. It was the kind of love that doesn't demand, doesn't judge, doesn't condemn. It simply is. And it was all around me. It was in the light, in the stillness, in the very air that I breathed. "I'm dead, aren't I?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, though there was no need to say it aloud. The realization hit me like a sudden gust of wind. I was no longer in the world I knew. I was somewhere else, somewhere far beyond the reach of time and space. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. His eyes met mine, and in that moment I understood that there was no need to fear death, because death was not the end. He smiled, a soft, knowing smile that seemed to hold the entire universe in it. "Your life on earth is over, David," he said gently, "but you are more alive now than you've ever been." His words sank into me, and I felt a wave of understanding wash over me. This wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. I stood there, floating in that moment as time seemed to stretch endlessly. There was no rush. There was no urgency. There was only peace. I had no need to go back, no need to hurry. In that moment, everything was perfect. Everything was exactly as it should be. But then as I stood there, a thought crossed my mind. Not just any thought, but the most important one. "What happens now?" I asked. The question wasn't for me, but for the world I had left behind. What about my family? My wife, Sarah, my kids? What would become of them? I couldn't leave them in this world without knowing what would happen next. And that was when he spoke again. His voice was soft, but I could feel the weight of his words. "David, you've seen the light, but the world is filled with darkness. There is a battle happening, and it is a battle for souls, for hearts, for minds. You have been called to be part of that battle. Your journey is not yet finished." And just like that, I understood. My time was not over. There was more for me to do. I was being sent back to the world of chaos and noise, back to the very people I had once been so consumed by. But I wouldn't be the same anymore. I had seen the truth, felt the love, and understood the depth of God's purpose. And now I had a mission. It wasn't just a mission to survive. It was a mission to bring light to the world, to share the love I had experienced with others. I was being sent back, but I wasn't alone, and I would never again be the same. As the light around me began to fade, I could feel myself being pulled away from that place of perfect peace and love. It was as though the very essence of my being was being gently drawn back into my body, into the world I had left behind. The warmth, the security, the profound sense of understanding. It was all slowly slipping away, and I found myself desperately clinging to it. I didn't want to return to the noise, the confusion, the struggles of my life before. But somehow I knew I had no choice. The pull was gentle but insistent. It wasn't violent or harsh, but it was strong, like a hand guiding me, urging me back to a place where I could still make a difference. I didn't understand it then, but as I was pulled back, I realized that everything I had just experienced, everything I had just learned, was not for me alone. It was meant to be shared. It was a gift that had been given to me, and it was my responsibility to carry it forward, no matter how impossible or frightening that seemed. And then the scene before me shifted. I was no longer floating in the void, no longer suspended in the serenity of that timeless place. I was standing on the edge of something much larger, something far more complex and vast than anything I had ever known. The air was thick with a sense of urgency, a sense of expectation. The future stretched out before me like a grand tapestry, and as I looked, I could see threads of light weaving through it, threads of hope, of love, of faith. But there were also threads of darkness, dark strands that seemed to be everywhere, twisting and turning through the fabric of time. Jesus stood beside me, his presence as real and comforting as ever. He didn't say a word at first, but he didn't need to. I could feel the weight of his gaze, the depth of his understanding. He was showing me something, something that would change everything. I could feel the importance of it, though I didn't yet understand what I was seeing. It was as if he was unveiling a secret, revealing a truth that had always been there, waiting for the right moment. As I watched, the world before me began to unfold. I saw flashes of cities, of nations, of individuals, but it wasn't just about what was happening in the present. What I was witnessing was far more profound. I was seeing glimpses of the future of humanity, the future of the world. And it was not a peaceful future. It was a world caught between two forces, one of light and one of darkness. And the darkness was growing. I saw technology rapidly advancing, with new systems of control and power being put in place. The promise of a better life, a more connected world, seemed so close, but it came at a terrible cost. I saw people being drawn into this technological web, where everything, their lives, their choices, their very identities, would be controlled by systems they could neither understand nor escape. The more I watched, the more I realized what was happening. This was not just a technological revolution, it was a spiritual one. Cryptocurrency, the digital currencies that had once seemed like a simple financial tool, were now at the center of this vast web. It was no longer just about money. It was about control. It was about power. It was about a system that would govern every aspect of life. The more people relied on digital currency, the more they would be tied to this system. It was as if they were selling their souls, not for money, but for the illusion of security, for the promise of comfort, for the hope of a future they could not see. As I stood there watching the future unfold before me, I understood something I had never understood before. These technologies, these systems, were not inherently evil, but the forces behind them, the powers that were manipulating them, were. They had a goal: to disconnect humanity from the truth, to pull people away from God, to make them believe that they could live without faith, without love, without hope. The more the world embraced these systems, the more they would drift further from the light. And then, as if to answer my unspoken question, Jesus spoke. His voice was quiet but powerful, filled with the weight of the knowledge he was sharing. David, this is the world you are about to return to. A world where the battle between light and darkness will intensify. A world where technology will offer comfort, but it will also offer control. People will be drawn to it, thinking it will solve their problems, but in the end, it will separate them from their true purpose. The words were like a punch to the gut. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, what I was hearing. The future seemed so clear, so inevitable, and yet at the same time, so distant, so uncertain. I felt the weight of the responsibility that had just been placed upon me. I had seen the truth. I had been shown the way forward. But how could I make people understand? How could I make them see what was really at stake? But then, as if to answer my question, Jesus turned to me. David, you must speak. You must share what you have seen. The world will not understand, but you must tell them. They need to know. They need to hear that there is something more than what they can see, more than what they can touch. They need to know that the true power lies not in technology or wealth, but in love, in faith in me. I felt a surge of clarity, of purpose. I had been given the privilege of knowing the truth. I had been given the responsibility to share it, to carry it into the world I was returning to. It was lost, trapped in a cycle of fear, distraction, and materialism. But there was hope. There was always hope. Jesus continued to speak, and I could feel his words sinking deep into my soul. This is your mission, David. The battle is not over. It is just beginning, but you are not alone. I will be with you every step of the way. The world will try to convince you that it is too late, that the darkness is too great, but remember this: the light is stronger. It always will be. And in that moment, I understood. I had been shown the truth, not so I could hide from it, but so I could bring it back to the world. I had been given a message, a warning, and a calling. The future was uncertain, yes, but there was something I could do. I could speak. I could share what I had seen. I could show others the way to the light. I felt a deep, burning desire to return, to fight for what I now understood. But before I could process it further, the light around me grew brighter, and I was pulled away from the vision back toward the world I had left behind. I knew in that moment that my life had a new purpose, a new direction. The time for action was coming, and I would be ready. As I stood there, my mind racing to comprehend everything that had just unfolded before me, I could feel the weight of it all. The light around me was now more intense, as though the very air was charged with purpose, with urgency. It was as if the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to understand the significance of what had just been revealed. The future, the one I had just witnessed, was not a distant event. It was coming. It was already here in the form of the subtle shifts in the world, the small changes that most people didn't notice. The system, the grip of technology, and the digital currencies that would control everything. It was already infiltrating the fabric of human life, and most people were unaware of it. Jesus stood beside me, not with the intensity of a teacher, but with the quiet strength of someone who knew what was at stake. His gaze was steady and filled with an overwhelming compassion, as though he understood the magnitude of the task ahead. "David," he said, his voice gentle but powerful, "what you've seen, it is happening now. It's coming in waves, each one bigger than the last. But people, they don't see it. They are too busy chasing after the next thing, too distracted by the promises of ease and comfort to notice the storm building just beyond the horizon." I could feel the urgency in his words, as though time was running out, as though there was something I needed to do, something I needed to understand before it was too late. The world was being consumed by the digital age, and the promise of a better life through cryptocurrency and technology was blinding people to the greater truths, the spiritual truths that lay beneath the surface. "You are not just witnessing the rise of technology, David," Jesus continued. "You are seeing the rise of a kingdom of man built on wealth, power, and convenience. But it is a kingdom that will eventually crumble. It is a false kingdom, one built on shifting sand. It may seem solid now, but it will not stand." I watched as the vision in front of me shifted. I saw cities bustling with activity, people glued to their screens, lost in the digital world. They moved quickly, mindlessly, like ants in a colony, each one focused on their own tiny piece of the larger system. There was no real connection between them. They were isolated in their own bubbles of digital existence, seeking validation, wealth, and status. They thought they were free, but in truth, they were enslaved to the very system that promised to liberate them. Jesus pointed to the screen in front of me, where the faces of people flashed by, each one caught in their digital world. "This," he said, "is what they are chasing. This is the lie they are believing. They are feeding the system, fueling it with their time, their energy, their lives. And in return, the system gives them a false sense of security, a false sense of peace. But it cannot give them what they truly need. Only I can give them that." I looked at the people on the screen, and I saw the emptiness in their eyes. They were chasing after something they could never truly catch. They were addicted to the digital world, to the idea that technology could solve all their problems, that cryptocurrency could bring them the wealth and power they desired. But as I looked deeper, I saw the consequences of their choices. The more they sought after money, after status, after success, the more they lost themselves. They became disconnected from one another, isolated in their pursuit of an illusion. But it wasn't just about the individuals. I saw entire communities unraveling. I saw families torn apart by the pursuit of wealth and success, communities fractured by the distractions of technology. I saw children raised in a world where everything was digital, where love and connection were replaced by screens and notifications. The digital world promised convenience, but it came at a cost. The more people embraced it, the more they lost touch with the very things that made them human. Love, empathy, connection. Jesus turned to me, his eyes filled with both sorrow and hope. David, you see the darkness, but you must also see the light. You must see the hope that remains. There are those who are waking up to the truth. There are those who are starting to realize that the digital world cannot fill the emptiness in their hearts. They are beginning to seek something deeper, something that cannot be found in the latest app or the next cryptocurrency boom. The vision shifted again, this time showing me pockets of light amidst the darkness. I saw small groups of people gathered in prayer, in quiet moments of reflection. I saw families coming together, reconnecting, talking without the interference of technology. I saw people helping each other, supporting one another in ways that went beyond the digital world. These were the people who had not fallen for the illusion. They were the ones who still understood the value of love, of connection, of faith. They were the ones who would bring light into the darkness. David, Jesus said, his voice filled with a quiet strength, you are part of this. You have been given this knowledge not to hide it away, but to share it with the world. You must help them see what is coming. You must show them the path to true peace, true connection, and true love. You must warn them of the dangers of relying on the system, of putting their trust in technology and wealth. These things are not inherently bad, but when they become idols, when they take the place of God in people's hearts, that is when they become dangerous. I felt the weight of his words settle in my chest. It was as though a fire had been kindled within me. I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't pretend I hadn't seen the truth. The world I was returning to, the world I had once been a part of, was on the edge of a precipice. People were heading toward disaster, blinded by the promises of technology and the lure of digital wealth. But there was still time. There was still hope. You will face resistance, David, Jesus continued. The world will not want to hear this message. They will mock you. They will call you foolish, but you must stand firm. You must speak the truth, and I will be with you every step of the way. Do not be afraid. And in that moment, I understood. This was my mission. This was why I had been shown the future. This was why I had experienced what I had. I wasn't just here to witness the destruction, to stand idly by. I was here to do something about it. I was here to warn people, to guide them back to the light, to help them see that there was more to life than the pursuit of wealth, power, and digital success. There was a greater purpose, a higher calling. And it was my responsibility to share that with the world. With a sense of purpose filling my heart, I knew I had to return. I had to return to the world of chaos, of distraction, and bring the message with me. I couldn't let this opportunity slip away. I had been given the vision, the knowledge, the understanding, and now it was time to act. The light around me grew brighter once more, and I felt myself being pulled away, back toward the world I had left behind. But this time, I wasn't returning as the same person. I had been changed, transformed. I had seen the truth, and I would never be the same again. And as I was pulled back into the world, I knew one thing for certain. The battle was far from over, but I was ready. The shift was almost imperceptible at first. One moment I was standing in the overwhelming presence of Jesus, feeling his love and peace wash over me, and the next I felt the weight of my body once again. I couldn't tell if the pull back to the world was gradual or sudden. All I knew was that the light around me began to fade, and I felt the familiar sensations of my earthly existence slowly returning. The warmth and safety I had felt just moments ago gave way to the cold, harsh reality of the world I had left behind. But it wasn't just the physical sensations that returned. It was the emotional weight, too. As the light dimmed, the worries, the stress, the concerns of everyday life, they all came rushing back. The weight of my responsibilities, The chaos of the world I had left behind pressed in on me like a suffocating fog. I felt like I was being pulled into a whirlwind, back into the storm I had tried so hard to escape. The peace I had experienced in that moment with Jesus seemed so far away now, like a distant dream. But I wasn't the same anymore. I could feel it. Deep down, I knew that everything had changed. I was returning with a new sense of purpose, a new understanding of what truly mattered. The life I had lived before, the life I had been so focused on, it suddenly seemed so trivial. It was all about the hustle, the endless striving for more success, more wealth, more comfort. But none of it had mattered in the light of what I had just experienced. The world, with all its distractions, was a fleeting illusion. The truth, the peace, the love I had felt in Jesus' presence, that was what mattered. That was what I needed to bring back to the world. But as I was pulled back into the world, I found myself in a strange, disconnected place. I was still in my body, still alive, but I was not fully present in the world around me. It was as if I was seeing everything through a veil, like I was walking through a fog that clouded my understanding. The people, the places, the events, they all seemed so distant, so irrelevant compared to what I had just experienced. I could feel the noise of the world surrounding me, but I couldn't quite connect with it. The things that once mattered, work, money, status, they no longer had the same grip on me. I felt like an outsider looking in, a witness to the chaos rather than a participant. The world was continuing as it always had, unaware of the storm that was brewing. People were still running the rat race, still pursuing the same illusions of success. I saw families sitting at dinner tables, but they were distracted, heads buried in phones, faces blank with indifference. I saw people on the streets, hurrying to get to their next appointment, their next meeting, their next goal, as if their entire lives were measured by the number of things they could check off a list. There was so much noise, so much disconnection. It was as if everyone was too busy to even notice the spiritual emptiness that surrounded them. But I noticed, and the more I noticed, the more I felt a deep sorrow for the state of the world. People were starving for something they couldn't even name, something they couldn't even see. They were searching for peace, for purpose, but they were looking in all the wrong places. They were chasing after material wealth, digital success, and fleeting comforts, but none of those things could fill the void that only love and connection could. The emptiness I had seen in the people during the vision, that same emptiness was still there, just below the surface. And I knew that I couldn't just sit by and let it go unnoticed. I couldn't just go back to living the same way I had before. I had been shown the truth, and now it was my responsibility to share it. But how could I do that? How could I speak to people who were so deeply entrenched in the noise of their lives? How could I wake them up to the spiritual truth they were missing? I felt so small, so powerless in the face of it all. I had seen what was coming, the dangers of the digital age, the lure of cryptocurrency and technology that promised so much but delivered so little. I had seen the destruction it would cause, the disconnection it would bring, and yet the people around me seemed so blind to it, so caught up in the moment that they couldn't see the storm on the horizon. How could I possibly make them understand? That's when I remembered what Jesus had said. You must speak. You must share what you have seen. His words echoed in my mind, over and over, as if he were speaking them directly to my heart. I had been given this vision for a reason. I wasn't just a witness to the darkness. I had been given the tools to fight it. I had been shown the truth, and it was my job to bring that truth to the world. I didn't know how to do it, but I knew I had to try. I had to start somewhere. It wasn't going to be easy. I knew that. The world was not going to just accept my message. People would laugh at me, mock me, call me crazy. They would see me as a fool for trying to warn them about something they couldn't even comprehend. But it didn't matter. I had seen the truth, and I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't ignore it. And I knew that if I didn't speak, if I didn't share what I had been shown, I would be complicit in the darkness that was consuming the world. So I made a decision. I would speak. I would share my story. I would tell the world what I had seen, what I had experienced. I would warn them about the dangers of the digital age, about the false promises of cryptocurrency and technology, and I would remind them that the only true source of peace and purpose could be found in love, in faith, in connection with God. As I began to come to terms with this new purpose, I felt a new strength growing inside me. I wasn't alone in this. Jesus had promised me that he would be with me every step of the way. He had given me this mission, and now it was up to me to follow through. The world may be blind to what's coming, but I was awake. I knew what needed to be done, and I would do it. The days that followed my return were a blur of confusion and disbelief. I felt as if I were walking through a dream, caught between two worlds. On one hand, I was deeply aware of the truths I had learned during my time with Jesus, the overwhelming sense of peace, the clarity about life's real purpose, the understanding of the spiritual battle unfolding around us. All of these things burned brightly in my mind. But on the other hand, the world I had returned to felt so foreign. It was as if I had stepped into a place where everything was out of sync with the eternal truths I had been shown. I felt like a stranger living in a world that had no understanding of the things that really mattered. The world was consumed by distractions, the rush to succeed, the need to accumulate wealth, the constant chase for validation through digital platforms. People were so caught up in the whirlwind of their own lives that they couldn't see the bigger picture. They couldn't see the spiritual emptiness that was slowly swallowing the world around them. I began to notice the subtle shifts in people's behavior, how families sat around dinner tables, but no one truly connected, how friends gathered, but the conversations were shallow, filled with idle chatter rather than meaningful exchange. People were more connected than ever through technology, yet they were more isolated than ever. The truth was that they were starved for real connection, real love, but they didn't know where to find it. And in their search for comfort, they were turning to technology, to digital currencies, and to material wealth, thinking that these things could provide what only God could. It was a painful realization. I saw the despair in people's eyes, even if they didn't show it. I saw the loneliness behind their smiles. They were looking for something, and they didn't even know what it was. I could feel their emptiness, like an invisible weight pressing down on them, yet they couldn't see it for what it was. And I knew deep down that I had been shown this for a reason. But how could I share this message with the world? How could I wake them up to what was coming when they were so deeply entrenched in their distractions? How could I break through the noise of their lives and get them to listen? The answer, as I soon realized, wasn't in grand gestures or elaborate speeches. It wasn't in trying to change the world in one fell swoop. It was in the small, everyday moments. It was in the conversations with friends, the interactions with strangers, the quiet moments in which I could share the truth of what I had experienced. The mission wasn't to force people to believe, it was to awaken them, to help them see the reality of what was happening, and to offer them a path back to the love and peace I had encountered. I began to pray more, to lean into the guidance that had been given to me. I would pray for the courage to speak, for the wisdom to know when to speak, and for the words to reach the hearts of those around me. I began to share my story, telling others about the vision I'd been shown, the things I had learned. It wasn't easy. People looked at me as if I were crazy, as if I had lost my mind after the crash. But there were others, a small, quiet group, who listened, who understood. They could see the truth in what I said, even if they didn't fully grasp it. And that gave me hope. It wasn't just about talking, though. It was about living it. It was about embodying the love, the peace, and the purpose I had been shown. I knew that I couldn't change people's hearts by forcing them to believe, but I could show them. I could live in a way that reflected the truths I had seen, in the way I treated others, in the way I carried myself. I could be a light in the darkness, a reminder that there was something more to life than the pursuit of wealth, success, and digital validation. Over time, I began to see small changes. The conversations with people became deeper, more meaningful. I began to connect with others in ways I hadn't before, not just on a surface level, but in a way that was rooted in something real. I was planting seeds of truth, seeds of love, and I could see them beginning to take root in the hearts of those around me. It was slow, but it was happening. As I continued to share my message and live with purpose, I realized something important. The change I had been shown wasn't going to happen overnight. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be painless. The world was going to resist. The systems of control, the distractions, the lies that had been woven into the fabric of society were not going to give up easily. But I had seen the light, I had felt the love, and I knew that if enough of us stood together, if enough of us woke up to the truth, we could change the world, one person at a time. The days grew darker. The signs of the times became more apparent. The world was heading toward a crisis, a moment of reckoning. The digital age, with all its promises, was pushing people further away from the truth. Cryptocurrency, technology, and materialism were slowly taking over, but I knew that there was still hope. As long as there were people who knew the truth, who understood the real purpose of life, there was still hope. Jesus had shown me that the battle was not over. It had only just begun, and now it was up to me and to others like me to stand firm, to share the message, and to fight for the truth. The world was hungry for something more, and I had been given the privilege, the responsibility, to show them the way. I wasn't alone in this. Jesus had promised me that he would be with me every step of the way, and I knew that no matter how dark things got, the light would always shine through. It was my mission, my calling, to share that light, and I would never stop.